call to order this joint meeting of the City Council of Highland Park, Illinois Committee of the Whole and the City of Highland Park Historic Preservation Commission. We'll start with roll call, then some comments by me, and then we will get into our scheduled business. And I just want to thank everybody for all the work that's gone into preparing for this meeting. But we'll start with roll call first for the City Council and then for the Historic Preservation Commission once their chair calls their meeting to order.
Councilmember Center.
Present.
Councilmember Bruckman. Here. Councilmember Ross.
Here.
Councilmember Tapia.
Present.
Councilmember Littleworth.
Here.
Councilmember Bloomberg. Here. Mayor Ritter.
Here. Thank you. And I need to confirm that that is Councilmember Bloomberg. I don't have a good question for you tonight, Councilmember Bloomberg, so prove to us that you are you.
Okay.
Who is Beebs? There's my question. Who is Beebs?
Oh, my God.
Excellent. All right. Are we okay with Councilmember Bloomberg joining us? Yes, we are. Okay. Thank you. And then we'll pass it to Chair Weeder to call your commission to order and to have roll call.
Call to order the Historic Preservation Commission, and may we have a roll call?
Of course. Commissioner Portman?
Present.
Commissioner Hardinger?
Here.
Commissioner Ehrlich?
Here.
Commissioner Gonka?
Here.
Commissioner Hines? Vice Chair Greenbaum? Chair Weaver?
Here.
Thank you so much. So we have a quorum of each of our groups. Tonight's joint meeting with the Historic Preservation Commission marks the next step forward in our journey to create a permanent place of remembrance in Highland Park. Before we begin our conversation, I'd like to invite everybody to join us in a moment of silence in honor of Katie Goldstein, Arena McCarthy, Kevin Michael McCarthy, Stephen Strauss, Jackie Lovey Sondheim, Nicholas Toledo, and Eduardo Ubaldo. Thank you. May their memories be for a blessing, and may the comfort and care for their loved ones continue to be front of mind for each of us this evening. It's not hyperbole to say that this is one of the most significant projects that our community has pursued. So often when we think of capital projects that build or transform or restore buildings or spaces in our community, we're laser focused on the future. We consider how well that project will serve the community for decades from today. And while knowing that this outcome will last for decades into the future as part of the core value of this team that's been planning for a permanent place of remembrance for the past nearly 3 years, the care and concern for the victims' families, people who were injured, people who were directly impacted on that day is paramount. So in undertaking this project, we're challenged to create something that will be enduring, but will be a meaningful place for solace and remembrance for people who continue to grieve today. We're also challenged to create spaces for remembrance that will balance different needs, that will honor the places in the heart of our downtown where so many lives were forever changed, while considering the resiliency journey of the broader community, including the residents and business owners who call the nearby spaces home. This is difficult work, not just because of the scope of the project and all that it must take into consideration, but also because we, each and every one of us, share a deep love for this community. Thus, we are also challenged to be vulnerable in sharing our own experiences and emotions. And at the same time, we're challenged to consider with empathy and compassion those whose experiences might be different from our own. As we embark on tonight's discussion, I ask that we all take care to be candid, because honesty and transparency are foundational values of effective government, and to be compassionate in our candor, because leadership without empathy does a great disservice to the most vulnerable among us, those who continue to be the most directly impacted by that day almost 4 years ago. Those are my comments just to set the stage this evening. And again, I thank each and every one of you for your time and for the thoughtfulness that you'll be bringing to this conversation. And with that, I think we just move to scheduled business and who is going to start with us?
Assistant Manager Tao gives a presentation.
Welcome, Commissioner Pines. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening. Just wanted to start with a brief history of the properties and projects that we'll be discussing tonight. To take you through some of the background. In 1930, the property Floral Park was acquired by the Park District. It was commonly referred to as the Rose Garden today. Actually, it is a portion of the property. The entire property is Floral Park. That has been with the Park District since started with the city since 1930. And in 1942, Governor's Memorial, which is the park portion, which was donated by the Men's Garden Club of Highland Park, was commissioned by them, designed and presented to the city in 1942. In 1992, Gardner's Memorial was designated a local landmark that was designed by Marshall Johnson. Marshall Johnson was the president of the Men's Garden Club and a landscape architect in Jen Stenson's practice and the son-in-law of Jen Stenson. This project was designed with several goals, and originally it was designed to commemorate 3 different residents of Highland Park: William Egan, commonly known as the first Rosarian of Highland Park; Jesse Lowe Smith, who's a naturalist; and Jen Stenson, landscape architect. Each section of the property, as we'll discuss in a little bit, was designed to commemorate a different portion of the work of the man it is that they are memorializing. And then in November of 2022, the city identified the space, commonly referred to as the Rose Garden, as the temporary memorial space, the space best suited to be the temporary memorial. And at that point in time, the city took over the maintenance of the property from the Park District. Prior to that point, it had been maintained as it was owned and maintained by the Park District. And then finally, in May of 2025, as a part of a land swap involving more properties, ownership was transferred from the Park District to the city. So the city is the current owner of Laurel Park and the Rose Garden. As far as the landmark status of the property goes, in 1992, the Gardner's Memorial was determined to be a landmark, meeting several criteria set out in city code for a landmark designation. And while I won't read each of these points, these were of the different factors that are considered for historic preservation. As you well know, these are the criteria that were determined to be met by the Historic Preservation Commission and ultimately the City Council in 1992. A little bit about the original vision for the project. This is the original 1942 design for the property. So you can see it encompasses many different areas, and we'll discuss 3 main sections of the park, but this was the full vision for the property. We do have a brief update from 1986. There isn't a complete history of the record as far as what has happened to the property from 1942 to current day. But in 1986, there was a survey. We'll discuss a little bit about it. We'll go through each piece of the property. But there were 2 pools originally in the design that were filled in prior to the landmark designation in 1992. There was a portion that contained a council ring that was a portion of the Jesse Lowe Smith Wildfire Garden. And then there were stone pavers that were never fully implemented. This is the existing condition. There are, again, 3 main sections. The Rose Garden, which was designed to honor the first Rosarian. There is the Wildflower Garden, which is in the northeast portion of the park that you can kind of see up there, that was designed to honor Jesse Lowe Smith. That contains the current sundial bench and retaining wall. And then in the southeast corner is what's called Players Hill, which was designed to honor Jens Jensen. That, in its current state, does not have any remaining integrity of design. So a little bit about, again, these 3 different areas. The Rose Garden, in its current state right here,
Many of those roses have been replaced over the years. They were replaced with hardier varieties. They have been reduced. They was never built to its full fruition as far as roses were concerned, because that just what was originally designed never came to development. In that northeast corner in the wildflower garden, there was a sundial bench which was built instead of the council ring that was added some point between 1942 and 1992. Actually, 1988, that bench was built. And that retaining wall was a part of the original pool that was filled in. That's what remains of the retaining wall. So give you a little bit of vision of that particular piece. There is additional sculpture placed in that area called Forest King, which was placed in 1959, that is unrelated to the original Marshall Johnson plan of the landmark status. So you can see what remains of that retaining wall for the pool, as well as the sculpture as it exists today. This is a picture of the sundial bench, which was built in there as part of that retaining wall as well. So again, this exists in the wildflower garden portion of the plan. So again, some implementation notes as we go over this. It was never fully built to plan based on the 88 landscape survey and the 86 survey as well. We don't believe the vision of the entire plan was ever built based on the historical record available to us. That rose garden, those rose plantings were reduced due to maintenance, replaced with hardier roses better suited to the climate, as well as additional plantings were placed there. That original pool was filled in at some point between 1942 and 1986. And a rain garden was placed in front of the rose garden. So these are changes from the 1942 plan. These conditions were as they were, we believe, to the best of our knowledge, at this point when the property was landmarked in 1992. As far as the wildflower garden portion of the property, the council ring was never fully implemented, and that sundial bench was installed in its place. The original pool, while we believe it was built, was filled in between 1942 and 86, but that original retaining wall remains. And the sculpture Forest King was installed in 1959, as I showed you in the pictures earlier. And again, that is unrelated to the Marshall Plan and the original design. And then the Players Hill, while it does have a marker, a stone marker for that, it was not built to design, and there's little integrity of design remaining in the current section of the plan, or of that area. And just an additional note, in the center of what is now the Rose Garden, a sculpture called Antelope was installed in 2015, completely unrelated to the Marshall Johnson plan, which was removed once the temporary memorial was put into place in 2022. So again, a summary of that current status. Those are the original three main elements of the plan: the Rose Garden, the Wildflower Garden, and Players Hill. The Rose Garden remains in a slightly altered form. The Wildflower Garden, again, though the section is there, very little of it remains. There is the stone sundial bench, which was in place at the time of the landmark designation, and the stone retaining wall was in place as well, though it was not built to plan. And Players Hill was not built to design, and so that is no longer a part of the current design and current landscape. So again, as we move forward with this Place of Remembrance project, we just would like to consider how the historic element restrictions could impact the Place of Remembrance design. They will certainly be a factor in addressing them and honoring them as the process goes forward. But they do have the potential to limit the ability of Place of Remembrance to achieve the stated objectives, and those are the three stated objectives of the Place of Remembrance that were established at the beginning of the process: to create an accessible public place for reflection, remembrance, and solace, to pay tribute to the memories of those killed, and to honor the community's resiliency, especially those who are injured. So as we move forward with this process today, we're seeking your feedback on the local landmark designation and how those historic elements will inform the design process as the primary focus, and how to incorporate that into the primary focus of creating a shared space. for the needs of victims and the broader public and the community. That, I'll turn it over.
Been where we are with SWA,
Sure.
why this question, aside from the obvious,
Yeah.
what we're trying to achieve with this conversation, I think that'd be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. As the working group began their process in 2023, as they moved forward, the first started with a process to determine the location for the place of remembrance, which involves substantial community feedback, a community survey, and in addition, a great deal of engagement with the community to determine where the community would like the memorial to be placed, the place of remembrance to be placed. The outcome of that engagement process was a recommendation that there be a primary place of remembrance at the Rose Garden and a subtle secondary marker at Port Clinton Plaza. Those recommendations were supported by the working group and presented to City Council, who supported those recommendations, those location recommendations. Following the location determination, we moved forward with a design engagement process. The working group moved forward with the design engagement process and issued a request for qualifications for firms to design the place of remembrance, seeking someone who is experienced in the process of designing memorial spaces, as well as extensive community engagement in that process, so we could ensure we're capturing all voices in that process. After interviews with the firms, as well as review of the proposals and public feedback from victims, families of the next of kin, as well as anyone in the working group and the general public, a recommendation was made to move forward with SWA. We engaged in a negotiation with SWA, and that contract was entered into in December of 2025. That project was then, January of 2026. That project was then kicked off, and we've begun the design engagement process for the community. As we went through this process, we did determine that the Rose Garden and Laurel Park was a landmarked property, and we needed to discuss how to best handle those concerns and honor the historic elements as well moving forward with the project that is critical to the community.
Great, thank you so much. So we just wanted to be sure that the HPC had that context if you haven't been following along step by step. And I think as Emily presented, close to 900 people provided feedback, and the primary question was, where should the place of remembrance be located? And the landing place was a primary place of remembrance, which is the focal point for solace and respite and remembrance, being in the Rose Garden, and then a subtle secondary remembrance at Port Clinton Square. So obviously, we want to have the opportunity to talk with all of you about the historic designation, the local landmark designation, what was intended, what never was built, what sort of was built, what maybe shouldn't have been built there based on the climate and the deer, and just to get a general sort of dialogue going in terms of moving forward. But we know that from the past 3 years, this has served as an important place in our community, and as my council colleagues I know will share with you as well, going forward needs to be a remembrance and also a testament to the resiliency of the community.
Mayor, may I add just one additional
Sure.
point? So in reviewing proposals for the consultants, we did review, references, their background, experience, expertise, and they provided some general concepts for what could take place at both locations. And so those are public records. We've had some questions about those. But so we selected SWA and Altogether as our consultants. At this time, we do not have any schematic designs. I know some people have asked us, like, what is it going to look like? So we don't know. So that's where we're at really at this point. We presented at the last committee of the whole to get policy feedback from the mayor and city council. And then our next step is to go to the Historic Preservation Commission to everything that Assistant Manager Taub indicated, getting your feedback as part of that process. Your feedback then will be given to the consultants as they undertake the listening sessions with the public and victims and next of kin, and then eventually we'll have schematic designs that will come back then to both groups.
And I'll just share that Altogether serves as trauma-informed specialists. This is the same group with SWA who did the Sandy Hook Memorial and several others. So they are cognizant of this isn't just a place. This is a remembrance. So I hope that is helpful context for the conversation. With that, Chair Weider, I turn to you and say, how would you like to proceed?
Well, thank you. I'm grateful to be here. Some of you know that I was one of the wounded, so I come to this particular gathering with additional, just additional insight, I guess. I believe that the enthusiasm showed in 1992 for the landmarking of this property and this landscape was not also supported by the devotion of resources.
Right.
And I'm hoping that with an overlay of an additional meaning on this landscape, there will be resources and it will become more meaningful. I think it's the siting of it is appropriate. I know that the temporary memorial has been a source of some solace for me and my late husband, and I remember fondly the story time from the library back on the up in the Highland part. Lots of happy times there, as well as significant next to the library, next to Stupi Cabin. I think it's a terrific site. We need to just balance. And my design advice is keep it simple.
So it's interesting because we had that conversation with SWA and now they'll be coming out to the public, but just to have the council have the opportunity, and there was a lot of discussion about natural materials and keeping things simple and having it be the place for the person and not the place that the person came to, so to speak. So appreciate your insights.
I'd like to open up comments to my fellow commissioners who have had some time to consider this.
I'd just like to ask, has any direction been given on the amount of space or where things are being located? Because from the report here, it's pretty darn clear that there's one section, the Rose Garden, that was developed according to plan. There's another section where there is something done, but it may not still be there. It may not have been done right. Who knows? And the third portion looks like it was never done. And having visited it, it's not in the best of shape anywhere. Especially this time of year, we might add. But even the Rose Garden, I've been there in the summertime. It's beautiful in a way, but it's not exactly in the best of shape. So the resources might be there for restoring some of these things that were intended to be there all along and developed. And as part of the overall site, to include the memorial. I don't know how much space you're thinking, where it's going to be located. Has some of that been discussed? And if so.
And that's one of the questions that's being raised is, do you maintain the Rose Garden and then build back to the ravine? Do you move the Rose Garden and build the entire site? Do you say, it's been a pleasure to the Rose Garden that, for the rose gardeners in this town who know the deer are happy to have expensive snacks and very few Rose Garden varieties make it for very long. Those are some of the questions, and frankly, we're looking to you for sort of your input about this local landmark designation. Is this, and I understand and recognize, with resources, you could build it to its original plan. I brought this along. These are plans from my backyard, done by Marshall Johnson, and they picked this one, by the way. I don't know how much of it looks like what it was, but the climate does change and the deer are more prevalent, and so things have gotten moved around. I think it's a matter of, and I'll let my council colleague Andres Tapia share his point of view, which I thought was an apt point of view about this place and being tied to plans of the past versus what we need to do for the future. If you want to share your comments, do you remember what I'm referencing?
By the meaning of historic?
Well, historic and relevant, yeah.
Yeah, we face a collective dilemma just because of the policy and what does it mean to protect something that is already landmarked. And yet, whatever gets built is going to affect this. And so since this didn't rise up to the fullness of its vision, and since your mandate is to make sure that we're preserving the history of what has happened in this city and its architecture and its feeling, right? Just for discussion purposes, I wonder if we could think about history in a kind of present and future kind of way too. Because what happened on that 4th of July is part of our history. So I'm suggesting that maybe we broaden the definition of historic, and it's not just a preservation of the past, but it's a remembrance of those who have been with us. And history does serve as a celebration and a remembrance of the past, the present, and then this place remembers is about a strengthened future despite the tragedy without ever forgetting. So I would just suggest more from a semantic perspective that maybe we don't get too trapped on what historic means as only backward looking, preserving the past, but how remembering the past can help us in the present and the future.
Mayor, if I could add just one other thing, just in response to the question. So since the shooting, we've been guided by the Department of Justice Office of Victims of Crime. So they provide support and assistance communities that have gone through mass shootings, mass tragedies. And so one important element that they have shared with us is that when you establish a place of remembrance is that you establish a location where people can opt into. So not to have it as a focal point that if someone doesn't want that visible reminder, it's not by their place of employment, it's not on their way to school, anything of that nature. So in looking at the sites, some people have asked, well, why don't you do it at the far west end of the property, off closest to St. John's off the curb line? And so just keep that in mind as we get your feedback is one recommendation is not to have it where it's visible from public right-of-way. So that's why closer, further back east would be preferred, but certainly that's what we want to get your feedback as it pertains to the landmark elements of that site.
Mayor, I also want to add, and just did want to note that that was one of the elements SWA had noted is that they want to approach the project holistically as far as location of the place of remembrance, is they want
To ensure that there's a continuity of experience for individuals so that it is not a section of perhaps walking through one section to get to another, and they're distinct, that whatever is built in whatever form is approached as a holistic experience for individuals so that it isn't necessarily jarring to be working from one section to the other.
I guess from a preservation perspective, I don't think anybody should be tasked with rebuilding what is either no longer there or, I guess rebuilding what is no longer there. I think what is still there needs to be protected, and I think from the original plan, there's a lot of trees that definitely existed when this was originally placed and certain design, but it's let go so far that it's sort of difficult to see without even some precursor maintenance where anything should go. A lot of the things, it needs to be stripped back to what we know was about the original design, left to see, okay, this was what was there originally. This tree was planted here purposely, or this tree was here originally and designed around, and all of the other garbage or things that have kind of come into it needs to.
The 1959 sculpture that was just bought.
Correct, and one of my other questions was, do we even know who these artists are? We have the names of the sculptures, but do we know?
We do.
Yeah, okay, and they're members of the, they were members of the community, or they're important artists that were commissioned by the city, and who owns the art? Do we know all that stuff? Yeah.
We do have.
Yeah, okay,
Yes,
all right.
yes.
I'm looking
We
at
can answer that right now, but yes, we.
Okay, yeah, I think that should be moved and put somewhere else in the city, because
And the
it's,
antelope doesn't need a return.
yeah, correct, okay.
Our bunkers.
Yeah, I question whether we even have the ability to maintain a rose garden, but I also I think that question's important because is what is built does it incorporate some sort of protection for the rose garden so it can exist and so deer can't just get into the rose garden and eat everything. So it can be maintained, because I do think it's important that rose garden exists and can be maintained by the city, because that's what was landmarked. It seems like it's there, and you can see it, it's there. And that sundial bench is great, and I think can be incorporated as well into the design. But I think whatever stonework, as Erica knows, I have also a problem with I know you like natural materials and all these things, but building something that matches all of this old stuff, I don't know is the correct way to handle it either. I think this new thing that is built maybe should be distinctly new and should not necessarily blend or interfere with the original design, although the original design should be there and maintained and allowed to be maintained.
So we'll circle back to you for design ideas when we are reaching out to the public. So appreciate your comments, though, tremendously. I can see Councilmember Center. I think you want to say something?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mayor. I think, first of all, the work that you guys do is so critically important. And, right, that's why we're here today, is to sort of figure out how we can ensure we're making a collective citywide decision considering all of the stakeholders and considerations that exist. I'd like to zoom out a little bit because we kind of dove right into how do we do this, how do we do that? I think, at least for me, I'd love to understand what makes this site significant for the landmark. And is there an opportunity to say, ooh, it hasn't been built to the way that we expected it to be built. Why don't we identify a different area to pay homage to those that we were trying to pay homage to, and use this site for what we're talking about today, the place of remembrance, which has been, really well vetted and thought through, and with significant input from the community and with third-party assistance. Can we take a look at what that might look like? I think, again, for me, and probably for the council in general, it would be helpful to understand sort of what about this site is significant relative to the historical significance of why it was designated in the first place.
I think if we go back to the slide that showed where they got the reasons for the landmark, it seemed like it was more not so much the space, but it looked like it was the architects. Number two, identified a person or person who significantly contributed to the development of the community county. I think that had to do with the landscape architect. And then same thing if you go down to number three, it's the same thing, overall design. And so it seems more, maybe it's not so much the space, like the actual location, it's more of the person, what they did at the location. And so I was kind of looking at it as more of, if you think of history going back to that way, there are many, many elements out there in the world that's not the original design. Notre Dame is a very good one. Many, many years to redo it, and they spent a lot of money to get it done, but I guarantee if you go into it, you probably would never know the difference before it happened. And it probably burned many, many years before. How can we do the same thing where we take the sundial, figure out a way where it kind of blends in with everything, but there is a sundial bench someplace? Can we use the same materials and, just somehow figure it a different way? Or even taking the rose garden, how do we make that and kind of do those things? And could it turn into other things where now there's a rose garden club? So now these are people that are helping out, kind of maintaining those things. So there's ways that you might be able to still use what's there, take the new design or whatever design gets created, use those techniques. So whoever and I apologize, I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but the main landscape architect, what was that person known for?
Marshall Johnson, he was the son-in-law of Jess Jensen.
Yeah, so, being able to use those designs, taking that retaining wall, what can we do, how can they take that same retaining wall and turn it into something that blends everything together? So you were not really changing the overall, I don't want to say look and feel, because there's definitely going to be a change in look and feel, but we're not changing the design elements. We're just kind of updating it so it looks like a Jensen kind of related thing, but knowing that he didn't specifically do it, but it's that same design. So how can we blend multiple elements that cover all the different facets that we're trying to cover in the space and still be able to make it so everyone feels comfortable, it does what it needs to do. And I think that's where we kind of have to figure out, because it seems like for me, the landmark status is more on the person than it is more of the place.
So are you interested in seeing an overlay of a new design of this place of remembrance, but maintaining the historic elements that still exist?
Me specifically, that I think,
I just want to make sure I'm hearing what you're saying.
yeah, specifically, I think that would be a good way where, you don't get into the situations of, well, they changed the whole look and, not the whole look and feel. Everything's not the same. So then why do we have landmark statuses? If there's a way that you could still blend it, because you never know when something happens and you have to rebuild it. How do you keep on doing those things? So I think if there's a way that we could do that or figure out a way to do that, it could potentially cover everything where we don't have to change the historic landmark, but still be able to stick with 92 or what they did in 92.
So you want to keep the status, keep the elements, overlay whatever improvements we have come up for this place of remembrance into those elements?
In my opinion, yeah, because I think it's challenging. Someone in 1992 came up with this plan and says there's a reason why. And us going in and changing it completely, does it open up precedents for so many other different things? And that's the challenge. I don't specifically know. But based on the short term that I've been on this committee, I feel like it could. So if we could figure out a way where we could keep the landmark status and still be able to do what needs to be done. And it seems like there's a lot of stuff that needs to be done. How can we do all those different things, keep everything going, and if there's a way that we can blend different elements, and elements can mean all kinds of things, the historic piece of it, the materials that are used, and kind of go from there. So that would be my 2 cents.
Thank you. Councilmember Ross?
Thank you, Mayor. I, first of all, want to thank you as well for, being here tonight and for your partnership in this process. As my colleague, Councilmember Sender said, that you are very valuable to the city. And I agree with you, Commissioner Hartinger, that there, I guess a question I have just to start off is, do we have representation from SWA in the room today?
We don't, no, because
Okay.
we're just looking for their
We're
feedback
just
at this
debating our
point.
historic designations.
Yeah.
I just thought it would be, interesting to have in here. I think, first of all, having walked it late today, again, there's a good amount of room there. It's not a, hugely confined site, there is room. And there were reasons, to honor, the 3 individuals that are honored. I think that it's a little concerning to think that 20, 30 years from now, if we decide, not that anyone in this room is saying this, that that it's not worth restoring, then could decades from now future councils and commissions say that this memorial isn't as important. These are, I think that we want it to remain important for decades to come, for the life of
Highland Park. And so I agree that I think that it just takes some real creativity, but that's what we hired SWA for, how can we accommodate both? Because I do think it is possible that there are possibly lots of different solutions for this, to overlay it. And I think that I'm personally, just one council member here, less inclined to just move pieces of the memorial away. The site plan, the painted, I don't know if it's a watercolor, it's just the original. We've got a better version of it online that you see on the screen. Is really lovely, beautifully rendered, and I think it's worth saving in a way that, and that there's enough room to creatively come up with something that can also be a memorial. That's my feeling. That we haven't seen the solutions yet. We haven't seen proposals for.
Well, I think one of the questions was, do we keep the rose garden structure in place? Because that is significant. And I think that frankly is the most existent at this point, given that everything else is not much that was in the original plan. And so to the city manager's earlier point, and to Assistant City Manager Taub's point, do you have basically a rose garden and you walk through and there's a memorial or a place of remembrance? Is the entire thing incorporated together? How do you make it so that people know why they're there and aren't stumbling upon something so important?
And there are lots of different ways to do that, through, different design elements, lighting, paths, and I know there are at least a number of victims, families that don't want to see people walking on, paths that represent victims, but still there are lots of different design elements that could be used. And as far as maintaining, or if we were to actually fulfill the original intent of the design, the Botanic Gardens obviously has extensive rose gardens. We're not the Botanic Gardens,
And they have a
obviously.
fence around the entire place.
In any event, I think I'm less concerned with the particular breed of flower. Maybe there's a hardier rose, but I just think
Double knockouts.
Just think that creativity, that there are many.
You would like to
ways-
keep the rose garden elements in place?
I'd like to see what's possible.
Okay.
That's what I'd like to see.
You're not wed to anything, but
I'm
you
not
would
wed
like to
to
see
anything.
what's
I'd just like to see
possible.
what the possibilities are, and I think there are a lot of potential.
Mayor, SWA and their team will provide us schematic elements. The purpose of this is really just to get the Historic Preservation Commission's feedback so we can give direction to the consultant before they start designing. I don't want to make it seem like they need ideas on how to design this.
It is
We really
literally
just,
yes or
what they
no.
need direction on is the landmark elements, how critical are they, what should they preserve, what they should work around.
So Commissioner Ehrlich and then Commissioner Gonka. Thanks.
Okay, I think no one's saying here, and I've heard nothing from anyone, that we're not going to preserve the landmark status of this piece of property. So, I think that needs to be clarified, and I think we're all of agreement that it's going to be maintained. The question is, what do we do with the property? And I think Commissioner Tapia said something that's very interesting, in that historic can be historic going back in time or historic now. But one thing that seemingly can't be too terribly historic is when nothing was done, but only planned on portions of the area. And we have extensive area there where we could put something up still that may have been planned in a smaller way, but we have extensive area there where nothing was done. And if something was done, we don't even know what was done, and we're not going to rebuild that because we don't know what was done. As you've already said, aptly on point, that we shouldn't be restoring necessarily what we can't restore and what may never have been done. So I think we've got plenty of area, and on that, Commissioner Tapia, where you said it's, historic is a thing going forward and back. And we now have something where we could put something very historic in an area that, and still commemorate the 3 individuals that deserve commemoration, and have an area for reflection. And it might be off to one side. I don't know, because that's for design people to tell us what they think in light of what they've done with other situations, and they're the skilled people. And then at that point, we could consider whether we think some modifications should be made. But I think now is our chance to make this really historic, the entire piece of property.
Thank you, Commissioner Conlon.
I just want to make sure somebody answers John's question directly, and because you were definitely insinuating, like, not in a negative way, just do we even have to consider any of this stuff? Could we build the Rose Garden somewhere else? And I think my answer is no, I don't think we can do that. But what I also don't think is that the Rose Garden can't also be part of the place of remembrance as a whole. The entire lot has been designated as the place of remembrance. That doesn't mean, the place of remembrance starts at St. John, even though the focus might be all the way in the back right corner. That entire thing is the place of remembrance that also has a rose garden in the middle that was designated as historic in 1992. I think that is, to me, that's the general idea, and we have no idea what any of the plans are, the design. Is this subject to a certificate of appropriateness, all things aside? Like, this is, like, okay, so, like, and there's definitely a lot, I mean, I think so too. Yes. Yeah, okay, so, but, so, right, like, I just think, like, okay, so let's see the design, let's put it through a guideline of certificate of appropriateness, and I think it needs to go through that process, but I also don't think that that is so, like, there must be a rose garden in its original form right here. That's not necessarily what a certificate of appropriateness is either. So I think there's definitely ways to preserve the idea that was the rose garden in the middle that isn't necessarily paving it in the exact same material it was originally paved and planting the original species of rose that it was. I think there's, like, maybe going too far is not preserving the original shape it was designed in. But I don't think the original shape it was designed in from that aerial would have really affects, that's not how you experience a space anyway. That doesn't affect necessarily the whole layout or how anybody would experience that space. I don't think you'd walk in and be like, why is there this funny pathway that kind of feels like a road? Like, nobody's gonna say that if it's done correctly.
Thank you. Commissioner Portman?
Thank you. First of all, I'm encouraged by the fact that we're doing this collaboratively and collectively with the City Council. Not just this City Council, but previous iterations of City Council. So thank you for that. First of all, as far as the landmark criteria, to Councilmember Center's question, if I'm not mistaken, in order to get landmark status, there are actually 9 criteria, and all you need is, I believe, 2? So these were 5 criteria that were established back in '92 that the commission members felt that it met these 5 criteria, but you only needed 2 to get a landmark status. So I think that bar was pretty easily met in this particular case, based upon who was being, remembered or the original purpose. So I'm going to make a couple comments about my hopes as to, where we go with this particular project. First of all, the thing that really struck me about the original designated property is that it's referred to as the Gardener's Memorial, which I think is a very clear message, okay? I mean, I think of memorials and I think of cemeteries. I hate to go there, but I think we all know how people just get outraged, if you will, if there is an attempt to try to move cemetery plots, okay? So the original purpose was to create a memorial for those 3 individuals. Now, I know that you can take property and you can still, for instance, I know that in your February Committee of the Whole, you talked about the property just to the east of the library. So there is property. You could, in theory, move or create a new Gardener's Memorial on that property, but I think it disrespects, and maybe that's not the right word, and I don't mean to criticize that suggestion, because I think any suggestion, which is out of the box is good, okay? Because, you have to, you can't get to the point of saying, oh, I don't like that suggestion if the suggestion is never made. So it's not that I don't like the suggestion, it's just that I prefer to maintain the fact that this particular land was a memorial to those 3 individuals. And I think that has to be respected. Now, when it comes to design, I really appreciate the comments from the city manager about the victims. Because I truly do believe that when you walk from the sidewalk on St. John and you start to come into this property, I really agree. You don't want to make the memorial, if you will, right there. And in my mind, walking into the Rose Garden, or what they call the Rose Garden, is a perfect entry into the memorial for the victims. And I have to tell you, I especially love that property back there, Players Hill and whatever else they called on the left side or on the north side. But I love that property. First of all, I love it because it's open space. But I just have a thing for ravines, and they've got the slope down there, and there was water running through that this past week when I went over there, and I go, this is a great place for. So my hope, and I'm just going to end by saying my hope is that we meld the history of the past with what we're trying to do as far as the current history, and create a project that will last, for the foreseeable future. And one last comment that I'm going to make about, I think one of the reasons why Gardener's Memorial maybe gets a bad rap, it's not so much a bad rap, but nobody knows about it. And why is that? We don't have a plaque. There's no plaque there. I know that you've got a plaque on the ground where it says something about Jens Jensen and whatever. And I thought about this when I was there last week, and of course I saw Stoopy Cabin, and I said to myself, oh, there's a plaque over there. I think I'll go over there and I'll read the plaque. And I'm thinking to myself, when I moved into Highland Park 40 years ago, if I had taken my kids over to the cabin, and if my 5-year-old and my 2-year-old said to me at the time, what is this? I would have said, oh, I don't know, it's just some old cabin that might have been somewhere and they decided it would be kind of cute to have it next to City Hall. And yet I didn't have to do that because the plaque says it all. So whatever is done for this particular project, please, let's create a plaque to explain to the public, not just what happened July 4th, but somewhere on this property to explain what, Gardener's Memorial was all about. Those are my comments.
It'll be in English and in Spanish. Sure. There are a couple people ahead of you. Thank you. Councilmember Littleworth?
Thank you. So, first of all, I can't tell you how it warms my heart to hear from the Preservation Commission. We all have our respect and we deal all the time. But to get to hear where you're coming from on this, because, we all know how serious this is for our community, but and how important it's been, and that's why we've gotten so many responses from people as to where and how, and that's why we're also spending a lot of money and time to do the focus group so people really can be invested in it. But having said that, what you do in many ways, and I do agree, Councilmember Tapia, that history can be looked at backward, present, and future. But it is a very slippery slope when we start to erase history. And I don't care if something wasn't properly finished. I don't care if something wasn't properly maintained. I don't even care if it wasn't properly built. In many ways, I look at this, and what I'm hearing from some of you is we're almost being given a second chance to improve upon the original landmark designation, and then to take it a step further, which is why I see it as melding the two, to represent another significant historical event that unfortunately we all lived through, some of us even more closely than others. But it scares me tremendously. And frankly, the whole thing about cemeteries, and I don't mean to be morbid, but you know, people really get angry. Remembrance, memorial, how do you want to even call this? But anybody who's done any history after World War II into the destruction of cemeteries in vibrant communities, and the amount of money that many people have spent in the last 2 decades rebuilding those cemeteries so that the people who lived prior to World War II, their memory comes back when you purchase a new stone for them. It takes away the destruction, the madness, and it brings back the remembrance of that time too. So I think we've been given a wonderful opportunity. I hate to show how ignorant I am. I did not know until very recently that this had been landmarked. I did not know, and in part, I felt that because the city hadn't owned it, it was the Park District's property, and so I'm not going to even get into the question of the maintenance of it, or even the initial building of it, and there's no point, because we're going to move forward. But if we're looking to have the funds to do this right now, I think we're being given a wonderful opportunity to take all of Highland Park's history, including the remembrance of these 3 very gifted gentlemen, and then include a remembrance of another horrific attack, but somehow bring to it, you know, the peace that we hope to find there in some way, and water and flowers and all the things that we're going to speak to about the particulars will be there. But I'm very troubled about the idea of moving either one of these out of that. And I'm also troubled, and to your point, Commissioner Harbinger, about some of the points that, you know, were made before in terms of the old landmark, and bringing those back. I think we're given a great opportunity here.
Thank you. Councilmember Bloomberg, didn't know if you had anything you wanted to add?
Yes, just very briefly, and thank you for all of the comments that have preceded me. I find myself very, very interested and moved by everything that's been said, and what I'm particularly encouraged by is the willingness of the Historic Preservation Commission to become involved in this, to understand some of the limitations on the existing historical items that are currently at the site. I think obviously there needs to be a certificate of appropriateness procedure. I think Commissioner Gaka hit it on the nose when he said that doesn't have to be a rigid procedure that necessarily results in a full specific outcome of identical materials and a reconstruction of the existing or intended items. There's an opportunity to incorporate the principal intentions of the Rose Garden into the place of remembrance. And I won't get into the design issues that I'd like to see or don't want to see. I think Mayor hit it correctly on the head when you observed that the group that we hired is perfectly capable of doing that, and the direction is that they should do that. They are going to have to recognize some of the elements that are on the site and incorporate that, and I think that has the potential to be a very exciting outcome that accomplishes what we want to accomplish with a place of remembrance and still preserving our recognition of past acknowledgments and the people that were intended to be recalled at this site. Lastly, to the extent that some elements of the site don't exist, may never have existed, I think it would be appropriate to find some way to remember those specific individuals and their contribution to the community. That part may not be at the site. And although it is a memorial, and I understand that, it isn't actually a cemetery, and so the issues are somewhat different in terms of placing some of the elements in another location in order to accommodate the very important opportunity for this place of remembrance. So, bottom line is I'm very enthusiastic about everything I've heard tonight. I think it's been a great discussion, and I support all the elements of people's concerns and observations.
Thanks, Councilmember Bloomberg. Commissioner Pines?
Yes. I think that we're very fortunate, very, very fortunate, in that we've got this piece of property sitting directly north of City Hall, sitting directly south of the Stoopy Cabins, sitting directly south of the library, sitting directly south of the ravine. I just think that that is something that we should all, for a moment, really feel good about. I mean, we've got a great piece of property there that I think fits the bill to a T, absolutely to a T. And I also think that there's an opportunity here for, with good design, basically taking everything that we've been talking about and melding it into a plan that does everything we're talking about in terms of respecting the past from years ago, the past from 3 or 4 years ago, and going into the future. Right now, this is history right now. Right now, as we're living right now, this is history. Somebody will look back on this and say, boy, they made some good decisions about that. And we will make some good decisions about this. And I think there's reason to be optimistic about it. And I think that the designers can handle this in a way with sensitivity to all the points that we've been talking about tonight, and do it with a great deal of competence. And I think they can. They must come up with something that we will love.
They will. I know
Yeah.
they will. Councilmember Bruckman?
Thank you. So just want to say thank you, and this has been an incredible conversation between the two groups. And to the point that was just made, I can't wait to see what SWA comes back with to both groups, so we could kind of look at everything from there and decide what works and what doesn't. I agree. I think this is an incredible opportunity to be able to work together on this and honor the place of remembrance as well as the historical landmarks. So thank you again, and I look forward to see what SWA comes back with on this.
Just a small point. I think there's some way also to pay some respect to the first responders in some tangible fashion. That would be, that would be essentially making this into a home run.
We already have that element.
Okay.
And we appreciate
Very
that
good.
input. Thank you. Chair Weider?
In architecture, we refer to this as both and. We can get a both and solution here. As a technical matter, I was looking into historical landscapes and the how historical landscapes are identified, and they are in historic preservation. All the language always includes landscape as absolutely as legitimate as architecture, and it's a little. I think it benefits this sort of program in that architecture and in that the landscape is more somehow more evocative, and I think a better place. It lends itself to contemplation better than a building might necessarily. So I do believe that landscape architecture will serve a positive purpose here. But as a technical matter, what we looked at in 1992, 5 criteria. We never get 5 criteria for a landmark. This was obviously very well regarded, but what we have here is it's the integrity prong. We don't have the integrity has not been maintained, and that is the sort of technical. That's technically where this landmark can be called into question, and I think bolstered, supported, and added to by this additional I'm going to say program, that's a terrible word for it, but this additional meaning imposed upon it, and so I want to make sure that we have good accessibility, absolutely. I want to try to make sure we have some year-round interest, which I think has been very successfully done by the landscape architects Oman von Sweden there at Evening Island. And I want to say that it needs to be a message, and if it means words on a plaque, there needs, in 20 years, people wandering on need to know. And I think words on a plaque is the most direct way to do that. What is our message? And that's, I leave that for others to hammer out.
Thank you. Thank you. Councilmember Ross.
Thank you, Mayor. And I just want to say how much, again, I appreciate, everybody's comments, but the commissioners have put it in such a lovely way about architecture and landscape architecture. And I think a first reaction, to hearing about the historic landmarking was that it presented challenges. But there was, a lovely plan that Jens Jensen's son-in-law designed, and the Rose Garden as an entrance is an opportunity. And I'm going to say again, I truly believe it's a matter of sheer creativity, and there's so much, like I said, so much opportunity. And I think that challenges, that whatever your existing conditions are, and meeting them creatively is where designs really shine and the most brilliant ideas come from. And so I think we should be encouraged and excited. And I guess I would also ask that, if I may, that I hope that, because SWA came to us with some boards of, landscape colors and lighting and whatnot.
Kind of like mood boards.
Mood boards, and I hope that they shift, as quickly as possible to actually what's the concept. But this is such an important meeting for that, I think. Yeah.
And I think it's important to remember that we placed the temporary place of remembrance at the Rose Garden for a reason. It wasn't like, oh, now the Rose Garden for the permanent place. We've already established that as a place of respite and solace, so I'm so encouraged by the conversation that we're having this evening. Thank you. Councilmember Tapia?
Yeah, to put out there, just to think also about how to preserve the spirit of the original plan, since there's not that many artifacts or pieces left, and it feels like an appropriate thing to preserve those, salvage them, elevate them, whatever. But since so much is missing or wasn't built, since this, what was one of the main reasons was to honor these architects. And some of these architects were, landscapers, landscape architects, to your point, Chair Reader. So I wonder if we could just ask the landscapers for us to channel the spirit of those architects and the landscaping, which is in the plan, but also we can have them think beyond just the plan, because we're honoring their work. Now, they had an idea about how to make it look in this garden, but I think they can think beyond that. As honoring these three architects that have these roots with Highland Park, their spirit, their legacy, their aesthetic informs, the other needs that this place has. And that's a nice way to, respect the historical legacy without being too literal about what had been there on the map.
Right, and I'll just share with you, when we had our mood board conversation with SWA, we referenced Jens Jensen and the materials and his meadow and the use of circles and all of that in that conversation as we just gave our input, and also referenced the use of native plantings. So I think we were doing it without even intentionally doing it. When we had that conversation, we were informed by this very cool picture. Commissioner Gonka.
I just want to say that I was ready to go there, so I don't want this to seem like I'm picking on you, but I don't think it's necessarily the goal to channel all of these things that have already happened. I think that the fact is that this place is a landmark that has existing conditions, as Yumi said. but the entire thing is the place of remembrance. The entire plot is.
Thank you.
And I think the challenge should be to actually, I don't want to say compete with, because that's not what it should do. But I think the level, Jens Jensen is an incredible landscape architect. The level of design that needs to be put into this needs to match the quality that was there. And that doesn't necessarily mean like materials or like, it needs to match, I think it needs to match intellectually and design-wise to all of this. I think that is the point. That is what is, the important things that are historic about our city in architecture are world-class. I don't know anything about SWA, so I'm not going to speak anything, but they need to bring their game on this thing. This needs to be world-class stuff. That is what is progressive about Highland Park. That is our history, is to invest into design. That is what the original citizens of this town did. They invested into design when they built their houses, when they built their buildings in this community. They invested into design. That is what we need to do. We need to invest in design.
And I assure you that's why we chose them. Thank you. Councilmember Center?
Yeah, thanks. Commissioner Gonko, thanks for addressing my question earlier directly, and Commissioner Portman, I appreciate sort of the level of care and explaining and context that you provided, and you know, the overall sort of commitment to collaboration. I hear totally your perspective and everybody in front of me, and frankly, probably the majority of the people beside me. And Chair Weeder, you know, the both and concept, I think that applies to a lot of things in life. So I like that a lot. I actually don't think it applies here. We experienced the biggest tragedy our community ever has. And hopefully one that all of us who were there never has to experience anything like that again. And from my perspective, it deserves its own place. And I believe I'm taking a big picture approach to this and thinking about the fact that we're 1, 2, 3, 6 people, and you guys are 6 people, and yes, there were 6 or 12 people before us who made this decision, but we also surveyed 900 people and hired trauma-informed experts to determine the best place for this remembrance, and that's where it was decided. And I'm just having a hard time myself ignoring the big picture facts and what we all experienced, despite everything that you guys just said. And so maybe it's a both and from my perspective, or you know. So I, you know, if this is what we're gonna do, I'll disagree and commit. You know, I'm there. It's totally fine. I just want my sort of feelings and my sort of perspective on where I'm coming from. It's not personal. It's sort of just kind of reading the tea leaves on everybody in the community and trying to be respectful to how horrific this was and the attention that it deserves.
Just real quickly, like I think, I don't want to say trust the process, but I think all of us here know that what happened outweighs any architect or designer. So I think it's like just, Erica pulled up what SWA's work is, and it's world-class. So, and it's chosen for a reason. So let's just trust them to do something that even, they're gonna do a great job. And I think it's not, the importance of Jens Jensen does not outweigh, or any of these 3 people that are part of this original memorial do not outweigh what happened 4 years ago, or, sorry.
Almost 4 years ago.
Yeah. It's not even close. So I think
to summarize sort of where we've all landed, keep the local landmark designation, incorporate historic features as feasible, see where the public input leads, and prioritize that this is the permanent place of remembrance of a historic event that happened, unfortunately, in our community. What do you need from the rest? Are we good to move on?
Thank you.
From this topic? Sure.
Sorry to bring that up. I don't want to open up a can of worms, but partially out of respect to Councilmember Center and everyone here, I don't like to put it as this is more important or that isn't.
No.
They're both significant in totally different ways. And I'm not gonna, I'm not even saying that this is even a possibility anymore. But in many ways, the reason I was so troubled to learn that this was landmarked was because I did feel that each deserved its own place in its own special way. And while we did survey the community, one of the reasons we do have, and I don't like to call it the secondary landmark, but the reason we do have something else in Port Clinton is because, frankly, a lot of people, and if you look at the numbers of people who voted, where should this be? The vast number of victims and family members wanted it at Port Clinton. Now, the overall numbers came out at the garden, but in many ways, I think one of the reasons we came up with the secondary place was so that there would be another spot that was just for remembrance of the victims of the 4th of July. And I also trust these architects to do, or the designers to do a world-class job to meld both. But in many ways, I do understand not only where you're coming from, but I agreed with you. And in some ways, that was why I was not in favor of it being at the Rose Garden. But I do trust the process, and I think that that's where we are.
And I encourage people to go to Jens Jensen Park and drive down Egendale and recognize that these guys are not just in the Rose Garden. Jesse Lowe Smith's house is still available and can be viewed from the outside. But thank you.
Commissioner Portman, can you?
I believe Jesse was a guy.
I saw her.
You think, are you sure?
Well, we can do some research, but.
It is that month, we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, everybody, for your input on this. We do have one other item to hear from the Historic Preservation Commission about, which I think is super important as well, and that is historic preservation incentives. We had a conversation, Gita and I, with the HPC several months ago, and Joel, I think we're having people speak from over there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, Chair Reed. Okay, so this presentation is about historic preservation incentives. And the purpose of this part of the meeting is to really just to encourage a discussion about a portfolio of incentives that were discussed with the Historic Preservation Commission as directed by City Council. As you may recall, back in the fall, in September, in the summer, beginning and into the fall, we got direction from Council to work with the HPC to develop ideas to encourage historic preservation. We met with the Commission on several occasions. Staff presented some ideas, and the Commission responded and provided feedback. And we came to the conclusion in December with the Commission adopting a resolution, making a recommendation that is found in staff's report. Essentially, that's the recommendation. The staff's report includes that. Now, you know, all of these ideas are not fully fleshed out. The idea was to see what might be ideas for encouraging preservation, and then to seek Council's further direction as to which to pursue. So the Commission recommended a layered portfolio of incentives as well as select disincentives to recognize the public good of private preservation, increase voluntary landmark designations, prevent loss of historic resources due to demolition, and fund preservation initiatives. Okay, so there's, we refer to them as tools. Okay, so there's encouraging preservation through financial tools, regulatory tools, and through penalty tools. So we'll go through each of these categories of tools in tonight's presentation. So the first of which is the financial tools. And there, the Preservation Commission said, let's look at property tax abatements, city portion only of the property tax, rehabilitation grants, and permit fee waivers. In terms of regulatory tools, they said, hey, let's look at or eliminate the number of properties needed to constitute a district. Right now, that's 10, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And We also looked at, in terms of regulatory to schools, zoning relief. And that would allow things like greater floor area ratio and reduced setbacks. In terms of discouraging loss through penalty tools, discussion was focused on ideas around longer demolition delays. Right now, the maximum delay is 365 days. There was also discussion about historic resource demolition, and meaning demolition tax associated with resource demolition, and prohibiting variances with loss of historic resources. So for properties that were demolished, that were of significance, they wouldn't be able to get zoning variances. So those were the ideas in terms of discouraging loss through penalty tools. Okay, so just for an overarching scope and framework, we're not going to get into the weeds on each of these, but just to provide a general sense. The idea behind this is focused on limiting the incentives to those designated regulated structures. There are currently 133 in the city. And those structures found to meet sufficient criteria during a demolition review consideration. As you well know, we don't necessarily have all of our historically significant properties locally landmarked or within a local historic district, right? So as time goes on, the number of local landmarks has gone up, as well as as well as when demolition delay reviews are conducted, properties are delayed due to their historic status, and so that's something that would be a trigger in terms of potential eligibility, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So eligibility for the financial incentives, just general overarching high level. This isn't all the details of a programmatic effort, but it provides just a taste of what we're referring to. Must either be a regulated structure or would become a regulated structure, meaning it voluntarily landmarked, prior to receiving any incentive. Okay, so encouraging local voluntary landmarks or having to do with already landmarked property or regulated structure, if you will. Constitute a renovation, rehabilitation of salient architectural features or elements of the historic resource. It's really important. And a certificate of appropriateness would be required. So these things together would provide at a very high level the entry into this. There'll be more details of programmatic development and requirements and exceptions, but before getting into that level of work, we wanted to understand what council's thoughts were on these matters. So with that in mind, that overarching kind of framework, so looking at the preservation tools and encouraging through financial tools, property tax abatements, city portion only, must be a regulated structure, rehabilitation grants, eligible exterior improvements only, regulated structures with certificate of appropriateness for work, permit fee waivers, eligible exterior projects, regulated structure with certificate of appropriateness for the work. Which incentives should formally be explored, and should regulated structures be eligible for a property tax abatement without renovation or rehabilitation project in mind? So in terms of looking at that, never looking at creating a program, understanding the scope of that program is really important. So there are various decision points that will change the scope of the program. So one of them is that last one that I just mentioned. And so you have 133 regulated structures right now in the community. Okay, and so we have like 14,000 properties actually, including commercial. And so, it's a small but very important portion of our community. So when you're looking programmatically at the scope of the program, this question becomes salient. So would, for instance, a property tax abatement apply to all 133 homes just because they're already landmarked? Or would we say that same abatement would be only if there was an investment made, meaning a rehabilitation or a restoration of historically significant features? And that's a very important point. It's not just for anything else in your home and things like that. It would be for the things that matter, the things that mattered in terms of historic preservation. Okay, so we go back to why this was landmarked, what were those features, are there features that were missed that are nonetheless important, and is this project about those features? So that's how we would keep that scope into the appropriate area, if you will. And so that's the financial tools aspect of things. So we'd have potential for tax abatements if that's entertained, rehabilitation grants, and permit fee waivers. Permit fee waivers is probably the easiest one of these. It's associated, provided that it's eligible exterior work, receives a certificate of appropriateness, is a regulated structure, that would be then eligible and would apply. Permit fee waivers are revenue foregone as opposed to cost, money being given to a potential applicant in the form of a grant. I would defer to the in terms of preservation through regulatory tools. So one aspect of what we had talked about with the commission was, the creation of local historic districts. Okay, we have 3 currently. There is a code requirement that makes it be that you need to have 10 properties to be considered district. And, the commission really was looking at that as, why 10? Why not make it far less, maybe 3 or 2? Right now, what we have is local landmarks, only 1 building, only 1 property, that's fine. And then we have 10 for a district. So there's no magic in the number 10 that we've been able to discern. And we didn't boil the ocean to try to find out why 10 actually happened, so I just want to say that. But having said that, this would allow, by lowering this number, maybe even eliminating or saying 2, because landmark is 1, right? So, okay, 2 or 3. It would allow for these more theme-based districts that are non-contiguous, and we talked about that previously last year in an amendment, but these non-contiguous districts nonetheless can have significance and tie together really important architecture and other history and might be worthy of considering even if it wasn't 10 properties. So that was one idea in terms of regulatory tools, and that's a fairly easy one and would allow for the creation of more local, non-historic, non-contiguous districts. In terms of zoning relief, allowing greater floor area ratio and reduced setback requirements could help historic properties. These properties, although they have very important elements that are tied to their landmark status and regulated qualities, there's a need to avoid functional obsolescence that might benefit from well-done additions or different additional changes to properties that would enable them to be more modern, if you will, in terms of some of those features. Allowing reduced setbacks based on past regulation to apply to these structures, the regulated structures. Our zoning code over the years has changed. And so when you look back at when these homes were built, what were the setback regulations then? And so why not have them apply still to those regulated structures as opposed to the current code, which may be and is appropriate for the community in general, but is it appropriate for the historic preservation goals we have for these regulated structures, these important historical resources? Okay, so discouraging loss through penalties. Instituting longer delays in demolition. Right now, the code allows a maximum delay of 365 days with a finding of 4 criteria. Okay, so extending that would further discourage demolition of historic resources, making the longer delay period. Establishing a historic resource demolition tax. Okay. So the code currently requires a $15,000 demolition tax and allocates the money for affordable housing. Council is well aware of that. It's been around for quite a while. It works well. So this idea would be to introduce an additional form of demolition tax, not instead of, but in addition to, that is triggered by a finding that the structure meets sufficient criteria. And so through a demolition delay
process or demolition delay consideration process, if sufficient criteria are met, and let's say the 365-day, let's say it's 4, when that home, if it does get demolished, then that tax would apply, this demolition of historic resource tax, on top of the demolition tax for affordable housing. So looking at that tax, the dollar amount, would be additive. And so that's an important part of an inducement not to knock down these homes. Prohibit variances with loss of historic resources. So what this means is, look, folks are looking for places in Highland Park to develop new homes. Okay, land is at a premium, as we all know. We don't have a lot of land sitting around just vacant in Highland Park. And if there is vacant land, it usually has some other issues. But folks are looking at, when they're going to purchase a piece of property just to demolish it, they're really looking at it as just land, okay? And so what this would do is say, look, if we're gonna lose something this important to the community, we don't necessarily wanna have a bunch of other zoning variances associated with it. It is a form of discouragement. It's a regulatory discouragement so that somebody couldn't come in and then say, well, now I need a setback variance and a this variance and a height variance so that I could have a much bigger home there that kind of doesn't fit on that lot based on our current zoning, and we lost the historic resource. So the nexus being loss of resource shouldn't have the benefit of additional relief. That's the nexus there. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation, and encourage discussion of this portfolio of incentives and feedback from the council.
Thanks, Director Fontaine, and thank you to Zubin and to Maddie and to the HPC for all the work that you've put into providing this opportunity. We're fortunate to live in a community that has a lot of amazing historic buildings and homes. Sadly, we've lost several, and more recently seem to be accelerating. And we know that there are plenty that are also still vulnerable that need to be protected. This is a great opportunity for several reasons. One, to educate this community. People need to know what we have, the treasures that are here, but also the risks that are being posed against them. I tend to lean towards generosity when we're talking about preservation, because once it's gone, it's gone. And we want to encourage people to stay here, but we also want to encourage people to protect the elements that make this such a special town. So I know you had something you wanted to ask, and I said, please wait until he's done, so go ahead.
Well, I just have a quick question, and it just goes to my reasoning for some of the other ones. When you talk about a waiver of permit fees, what kind of money are you talking about?
It depends on the project. So the base fee that we have is a 1% of construction cost. So, and then there are additional incremental fees depending on what else is happening in the project. So
No,
whether
that's
it's
very
electrical,
helpful.
plumbing, and other.
I just didn't know if this was like your $75 fee.
Oh, no.
And I was gonna say, okay, that's trivial, we don't
No.
need to bother with this. But if you're talking about 1% of construction costs, you're talking about significant money. And there's a range in there, so you're telling me that's even more. If someone's doing a $500,000 renovation, we're getting into some significant money here. Because the $15,000 demolition, we have, as a council, heard complaint many times and had people come to us and say, that's just on top of everything else I'm doing, I have to pay this too. But, that's when you're beginning to hit a point where people care about the money. So a $75 permit fee wasn't gonna cut it for me.
Right.
But,
Great, thank you. If you don't mind, can I call on the council? Because you guys have had a lot of time to digest this, and I think they're kind of, if that's okay with you guys.
Do you want my thoughts now?
No.
Great.
Councilmember Bruckman?
So I think all these policy considerations, I'm in favor. I had a question though about the program, there was a comment about the 10,
The historic district, but they're
Yes,
not
correct,
contiguous.
Yes, yeah, why, you want to change that, I guess, or I said, the back history on that, I'm just curious.
So
essentially, we don't know exactly why the magic number 10 was picked.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll concede that point. But in terms of historic preservation, the commission and staff thought that, you know, it should be less to allow for more non-contiguous local historic districts or theme-based districts to be, as opposed to geographic districts, be created. So there might be an architect or a specific style or design that we're trying to capture, and those can be then nominated and considered and enacted.
Okay, helpful.
Through the mayor, right?
Thank you.
I
If
just
you
wanted
want to add to,
elaborate on, like, the reason is it's no longer, it's all voluntary now at this point as well. There's
Right.
no involuntary. So if two people want to come together and say, our two homes are important together, why would we not let them have this like ceremony of landmarking their houses together? And I think that was the whole idea. Is like, as long as it's all voluntary at this point, why are we discouraging an element of community that could be brought into preservation?
thank you. Councilmember Tapia?
Yeah, I like the holistic nature of the incentives and disincentives, so I think it's very well thought out. And the purpose for it is, you know, Highland Park.
Do you want to?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I love the tax abatement. I would do anything to incentivize property owners to do this. I think the FAR is a big deal.
Mhm.
You buy a property and you can't grow it, and frankly, there are modernizations. You want a good kitchen, but you have this beautiful landmark piece, and you just can't make that 25-foot setback or 9-foot setback on the side. So I love the idea of the FAR, and I think that's really giving people something. It's incentivizing them to keep the house as it is, but it's permitting them to live in today's world instead of penalizing them. And so I love those two especially. The matching funds for historic rehab, if they're doing a new project, I would be very much in favor of it, but I would have a floor amount so that it's not, you know, like a $5,000 window treatment type of thing that we're going to pay for their new windows, because like me with the landmark house and all single pane, I'm out of my mind with the, you know, when it's cold, but it's not. Okay, so I like the idea, if it's a larger project, and I would leave that to staff to come up with some dollar amount, where after that we would do something to help those families with those homes. I don't like the idea at all of reducing the number of properties needed for a district. I think it's, if people want to landmark their home, if two properties want to have the ceremony together and make it a community type of thing, I think that's great. I also don't want to disincentivize people from coming into this community or saying, oh, this is a non-contiguous thing, oh my God, how did I get affected by this long-term? And that kind of concerns me, so that was one. I like the number 10, because I think that, and I don't mean to overuse the word trivialize it, I think it makes it really special when you get a group of houses like that by a particular architect or of a certain style. So that one I was not in favor of. I think once you're up to 365 days for demolition, so you do another 6 months. I mean, if they're going to wait it out for that long, they're going to wait it out for anybody who can carry the property for another year, and another 100 or 200 grand is going to wait another year. So I don't really see, other than the whole community and neighborhood being affected by having something waiting to go. And I don't think that's fair to the rest of the community. So I like staying where we are on that one. I love the idea of prohibiting the variances for redevelopment. So that, you know, if you're going to take this house down, you're going to get it as it is, and you cannot change the whole character and put up a sixplex.
McMansion, right.
Yeah, or a McMansion, thank you. Anyhow, I think that's hitting them all.
Wonderful, thank you. Councilmember Bloomberg? If you're talking, we cannot hear you. Okay, we'll come back to Councilmember Bloomberg. Councilmember Ross?
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Now we can, yes, thank you. You're like a cell phone ad. Yes, we can hear you now.
Sorry about that. So just two things that I want to address. There are two separate issues. One is encouraging landmarking, which I agree should be a positive effort. I want to add that The issue of getting a certificate of appropriateness, this commission has demonstrated, is not a difficult process. They've been very generous. They have proceeded in the spirit that this is intended. They have recognized additions that are not necessarily identical architectural styles to what is being added to. Sometimes it's important to distinguish what's being added from the existing structure to assure that we appreciate the existing structure. So I want to make sure that the public is aware that what used to be considered an impediment of having a landmark building, that you would have to go through a complicated process to add on anything to the exterior of the house, is really not. This commission has demonstrated the spirit and intent of the certificate of appropriateness process and made that easy. The other thing is that we want to discourage tear downs, and that's hard to do in a positive way. We've attempted that in a variety of ways over the time that I've been on the city council. I agree that the issue of prohibiting variances, if the structure is going to be torn down, may get at the root of what causes tear downs to happen. Oftentimes the existing structure is smaller than could be built currently, or smaller than somebody wants to build without variances. We recently saw this where variances were requested to move the building further forward on the property, put a swimming pool behind it. So the idea of being very encouraging about being able to alter and expand an existing structure if you're able to keep it and if it's landmark, and at the same time telling you if you're going to tear this down, you can't rebuild with something bigger, you can't move it around on the lot, you cannot apply for variances. And I think this is important because one of the things that I've heard from my fellow council members, and I'm sympathetic to it, is the idea of we don't want to remove property rights. And so this doesn't. You don't have a right to a variance. You have a right to apply for it under some circumstances, but you don't have a right to a variance. And if we say that you're tearing down a protected structure, a recognized structure, a structure that's been identified as important by this commission, you can only build back what's there. And there are good reasons for that were pointed out by staff, that it preserves the spirit of the neighborhood and the impact that the structure originally had on the neighborhood. I think that's an important element of discouraging tear downs. It's a separate issue from encouraging landmarking, and I just wanted to point that out.
Wonderful. Thank you. Councilmember Ross?
Thank you, Mayor. That I guess I wanted to share that I've talked with a few residents who are passionate advocates for historic preservation, and I've said it at a public city council meeting that I felt we need to make it so attractive to apply for landmarking status that owners say, absolutely, I'm going to seek it. I like the idea of pretty much everything that has been proposed. I'd like to see, as much tax relief as possible for a longer period of time. I love the idea of creating a grants fund, and the idea of a demolition tax that would go toward funding it. I'm not as certain. I have to give more thought to the non-contiguous district. I'm open to anything at this point. I just need to think about it some more. But I appreciate all the work that has gone into these proposals. I appreciate the commission's work and staff's work. I'm really encouraged by this. I think it's great work toward a goal we all have. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Councilmember Center.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I agree largely with the feedback so far. I have a few questions that I think will influence a little bit of kind of where I shake out or what I'm recommending a little bit. Sir Fontaine, following up a little bit on Councilmember Littleworth's question, help me understand a little bit more of the economics of the financial incentives. So let's take a $500,000 home. Like, you know, what's the kind of the aggregate average benefit from the proposed property tax abatement for the fee waiver, for the, you know, other suggested kind of economic benefits that are listed there? Can you give me a ballpark?
We didn't do that math per se, but what it would be is the city is about 8% of the property tax bill. So
Right.
it would be 8% of the property tax bill. And the question would be is, you know, would that be something that goes with the regulated status and perpetuity that, you know, has significant, you know, impact? Or would it be for a duration of time, kind of like the state, where it's 8 years, I believe the state is, or it could be some other time period that the council so chooses. So that's one. So it's, you know, those alternatives and things like that would be further developed if we were asked to look into them, and we would provide the information that you're looking for to kind of compare the different incentives in a financial context. The permit fees would be 1% of the value of the construction. We'd set a minimum value of construction associated with the improvements to make sure that they're significant in terms of what they're going to do to save the property. You know, the demo tax we'd probably recommend, I mean, from the staff perspective, something about the same size as the current demo tax. That could provide funding for these incentives as well. It doesn't have to be that same number, but, you know, the affordable housing initiative is an important initiative. This is an important initiative as well. So, you know, if we did 15,000, then it would be 30 as a disincentive to demolition.
Yeah.
You know, added.
Thank you. So I'm just running some like math in my head, right? If somebody's trying to build $1 million house, at 1%, that's $10,000, and they're probably saving $6,000 with 8% on their tax bill ish. So $15,000. Like, in my opinion, that is just not enough incentive. And I don't have the answer, obviously, but I think we need to think about how can we create more benefit for incentive. And I don't know if there's any type of historical look back or tax refunds or something more meaningful. I don't know what we're legally allowed to do, but I'd love to explore increasing those benefits from a financial perspective. On the flip side, the demolition tax, I wanted to ask Corporation Counsel, what is legally allowable?
Well, we have sustained, we have become the model in Illinois of a demolition tax that relates to our affordable housing. We have created, when we first drafted that ordinance back in 2000 or around there, we established a nexus between the demolition of a home and the need for additional housing or bedroom space. And if we were to bring it into historic preservation, we would have to simply make sure that there's a nexus between the tax and its use. Unlike a fee, and we've talked about this, where there has to be we have to use the fee directly for whatever purpose it's collected. This is a tax. So it's a little different. We just have to have a nexus for its use, but as far as the law is concerned, we have a lot more flexibility.
So if we determine a nexus, is there some cap?
I believe that we can find a nexus,
Okay.
by the way that the Historic Preservation has drafted their resolution. I believe that we will be able to find a nexus.
When we find a nexus, are we rate capped with what we can charge?
Not necessarily.
The market is free.
Yeah,
Okay,
right.
okay.
I mean,
So,
from a legal
I'm not gonna say a
perspective.
number right now, but like, again, I think we have to.
I think Joel has
Sorry.
some.
Just one thing I just wanted to add, and, you know, like Steve said, there's the ability to do it. One thing when setting a tax, you know, you might want to just keep in mind the overall policy of involuntary landmarking, right? And how we don't have that. We have voluntary landmarking, no, right? If you set a demo tax so high, you will de facto cause involuntary landmarking. So I just put put that out to the council because
That's
of
fair, yeah. That's good,
the
yeah.
policies that you've set forward, I just, so that.
But my answer from a legal perspective is, the sky's your limit.
The world is your
You have
oyster.
you have a lot of policy and political considerations that you have to take into
Right.
consideration.
Correct.
Demolition is different than rehab, though.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
just
you're
thinking about the
removing a
involuntary
unit of
component.
housing. You're
But-
yeah, and so
okay.
that's where that nexus is.
Yeah, if you set a demolition tax that is so high that no one can demolish it, then you're de facto.
It's a fair point, so it's kind of contradict, okay, I get it. That said, again, I think we need to be thoughtful around what really is the penalty, right? Because I think what we typically deal with in history is these beautiful large homes, and people build beautiful large homes, and so the financial means for the people who are doing this, it needs to be impactful.
The good news is we're not reinventing the wheel. We have neighbors who really have treasured preservation and have already done a lot to preserve homes, so we can look to them as well as our peers.
And let me just give one caution to Councilmember Center's comment. Let's be very careful in describing this, that we're not describing it as punitive.
Right.
That's the one concern I would have from a legal perspective. We've established a nexus, we're doing it for incentive, that's a good word. I just want to avoid using the word punitive because we get
Incentivizing
challenged.
preservation is.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Maybe going back to my point around the benefit, is there an ability to throw a restrictive covenant on the title to prevent tear downs for 99 years, X amount of time, legally?
Involuntarily? I mean, we imposed by
No,
the
like
city?
if an owner says, oh, I'm willing to accept X benefit, and in exchange for that, I will put a restrictive covenant on my deed.
Yeah, it's done quite frequently, and but it would be a voluntary restrictive covenant. It could be a restrictive covenant that the owner could then release, or a restrictive covenant that would inure to the benefit of the city, or to an open lands, or some other, or a preservation society or group, a third party that would make it more difficult for the owner or subsequent owner to release.
Yeah. Obviously, it wasn't something that was on your list, but I'm just trying to think creatively of some other things that might be out there as we continue to make sure that we're putting belt and suspenders, if you will, and coming at this from different angles. There's something that came to my mind, yes.
The concern that you give benefits to these people and then 3 years later they get knocked down through some other process. I think the requirement that Joel pointed out is that they would voluntarily landmark their house to even qualify for any benefit. So as soon as they do that, that's with the property forever.
Okay.
So you would not be able to demolish the structure then.
Yeah.
Yeah, except in rare cases, like if there's an unfortunate fire.
Sure, yeah. Okay, then the last piece is on the districting. I want to just make sure I understand what the proposal here is. Are we saying, I hear that trying to reduce the number. Are we trying to eliminate the voluntary component to that?
No.
Not make it involuntary?
The only reduction of the number is that basically non-contiguous historic zoning districts don't exist anymore. So it's just reduce it to 2, and it doesn't matter if 2 people want to voluntarily landmark their houses together and go through that process, then just let them.
But the issue that came across earlier this year was sort of a potential involuntary.
Which doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I mean, from that perspective, I think I like I like your example of saying, like, there's a few people who really are passionate about this, and right now they're not allowed to designate, right, as a district.
Correct.
Okay, I get it.
Something else
There's literally no point to argue about it. It's just like, just reduce it to 2, and then who cares anymore, because it doesn't exist anymore.
Great.
That's all I got. Thank you. Appreciate it.
We're wrapping up, getting close to 8:30. Any follow-up? Yes.
Just a couple of comments. Number one, just so that you all know, the work of the commission is always about the exterior of the building and/or the property, okay? So when we talk about matching grants, it has nothing to do with the interior, other than if somebody wants to build out. Okay, so a certain portion of that build out would be, the exterior, but putting in the new kitchen and all that other kind of stuff inside the house, that's not what we're talking about here in terms of grants. The other question, or the other this is getting into the weeds a little bit, if you will, of tax procedure, if you will. When we talk about the possibility of doing a local property tax abatement, it would only be for, as we already said, it would only be for the city portion. So if you have a property that's got a $500,000 assessed value, or whatever that comes out to be, the city's portion is the one that's being considered for an abatement.
Right.
But here's my question, and I don't know if anybody here can actually answer this, but when you take properties and give them an abatement, that reduces the assessed value of all of the properties, of the total number of properties that Highland Park is taxing, the city of Highland Park is taxing.
So others are bearing the burden.
That's what my question was. It's just a transfer, and I would say it's an equitable transfer, and it's also a reasonable transfer, because we're trying to enhance the value of your property by limiting tear downs, et cetera, et cetera.
You're diminishing what a person can do with their property to some extent.
Right.
And by virtue of saying, I like your house, keep it that way, the rest of us are bearing some of that.
Yes, and I'll bear it on their behalf because my house isn't, but I'm going to get taxed, $5 more a year because you don't have these properties that are paying the tax. I just wanted to make that clear. It's not a loss of revenue to the city, it's just a reallocation.
Reappropriation.
But it can be done more, as we're familiar with sales tax, where the city rebates.
Right.
Once received, rebates that portion that the city has received from real property tax. There's different ways to get
So
at
you
it.
could do that as a second
Yeah,
option.
and that way the city is losing revenue, but no one else is. It's more like providing a grant.
That's an expenditure from our general fund.
Right.
The tax levy portion is, we levy a property tax amount. We get that regardless of what happens in the community, right? So, for example, like Solo Cup properties being developed, some people had a, misunderstanding that you're gonna get more property tax revenue as a result, and that's not the case. That's not the case. What's happening, as the mayor indicated, it just gets redistributed, but we're still getting exactly what we levied.
Right. Commissioner Ehrlich.
We want to thank the Historic Preservation Commission. We'd like to thank Manny and Zubin for their tremendous efforts into checking out this wasn't us creating the baby. They looked at other towns similar to us and some dissimilar, like Hinsdale or Oak Park, Evanston, and they gave us proposals, and it was a brilliant job by both of them in presenting that to us. It helped us tremendously, and we'd like to thank City Council too, because you put this to us, and it was something that we needed to be doing. It should have been done by the Historic Preservation Commission 20 years ago, and you proposed and came to us and said, well, we're not happy, you're not happy, let's propose something. And so we did come back with our proposals, and they can all be workable, and the economics of it can be looked into further. But that's what we'd like to say.
Perfect segue to my question, which is Director Fontaine, Corporation Counsel, what needs to be done to take official action next?
Okay, so the Historic Preservation Commission has spoken. They've made a recommendation in the form of a formal resolution adopted at their January meeting.
Right.
It is now before you. You've considered it at a committee of the whole meeting, which is tonight. We did this so that the Historic Preservation Commission could be part of the conversation and add to whatever consideration. It now is up to the committee of the whole to determine what you would like staff to do with this. Would you like us to draft an ordinance including parts of it for the village, for the city council to consider? Would you like to have another committee of the whole discussion on it? That's up to you. You can't take action tonight, of course.
I hear interest. I'm not quite sure I have consensus on each of the individual points. So I almost feel like a half an hour committee of the whole conversation of, this is what we heard. I know you've been taking copious notes for recording the meeting. If you could kind of pull together where we all have landed, I think then we can, and you're of course welcome to be at that meeting.
We'll let you know.
Not as an official group, but as observers. You can throw paper airplanes. But, I think, and then we can kind of figure out what the consensus of the council is to then move forward and take appropriate action. That makes sense. Great. Cannot thank all of you enough, not just for tonight's meeting, but for all of the heavy lifting and pre-work that has gone into both of these conversations. It's really been deeply appreciated. Thank you.
This is a nice thing to do, to have two different groups together, and, you know, it's sort of like, you know, you're just not swimming at the end of the pool there with nobody else around. You know,
Is anybody listening? Yeah, exactly. Appreciate it. With that, Chair Weider, I'll ask you to ask for a motion to adjourn your group, and then I'll adjourn the council.
I'll make a motion.
You can do a voice. You can do a voice vote.
Voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Thank you all. Seeking a motion to adjourn the committee of the whole meeting? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Thanks. We stand adjourned, and we thank you all for your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you.